Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me here and thanks for checking out my podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell for new episodes. You can also find Shine Without Shame on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Today, my guest is Nancy Wong. Nancy is a freelance photographer currently based in Chicago, Illinois. She also works remotely as the communications officer for Asian Women United of Minnesota, a domestic violence nonprofit in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Nancy's photo work has taken her throughout the United States, including Hawaii, and internationally to Israel, Turkey, Ethiopia, Uganda, Mali, Liberia, Ghana, Macau, and Okinawa. Thanks so much for joining me, Nance.
Thanks, Tiffany. It's good to be here with you.
Yay. So, yes, I was trying to recall when we met each other and how. I don't think I'm going to get the year right, but I remember that when I lived in Chicago, you were not living there. You were at the time in Israel, and I don't know how long you'd been living in Israel, but your reputation preceded you. I knew about Nancy Wong while she was in Israel. All my friends in Chicago knew you and loved you. So I always heard about you, heard stories about you. And maybe it was after living in Chicago a few years, you came to visit or you moved back. But eventually you moved back to Chicago, right? While I was living there.
Yes.
And you go
Yeah, and
ahead. Yeah.
I had fun getting to know you, working with you, and spending time with you. So yeah, it was blessings upon blessings.
I agree. And I was working in video production for a religious nonprofit organization, and you actually came to do some, I think it was like freelance work, right? Was it photography work?
Yes.
Yeah, that was cool. Well, so glad to chat with you. And I'm excited. I think that about this conversation, I think that you and I can have a good conversation about the many aspects of shame. And I'm curious to hear more about what you've witnessed. And I think I'll start with the concept of our society's desire to encourage people to promote this idea of being number one, being the best. And I'm just curious in your experience in life, either personally or just what you've witnessed, with being around other people, especially maybe even in a field that's a little bit competitive, photography. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about this idea. Why do we have to be number one? Why does it have to be this all or nothing? Like you've either made it or you haven't made it. And you made it if you're number one.
Yeah. I think it's a really important question to think about every now and then because we're so immersed in it on a daily basis, we don't even recognize that it's happening or what is driving us. Um, Personally, I feel like it's very limiting in the sense that, the concept that there's only one person who can be number one, okay, yeah, like it makes sense on one level, but on another level, it really doesn't allow us to really look at what are the other qualities that we're looking for to, I don't know, see either the best or the goodness or the winner or whatever. Um, I always think about that analogy of the human body and how the different it's like the human body is one large intricate complex system, and within that system there's all these other systems that are happening, right? And they each have their own kind of ecosystem, like their own. I'm not a doctor or even like a scientist that knows a whole lot about the human body, but the only experience I have is like being in one for all these years. And so I think about how there's different parts of my body that function, and it really helps, like its purpose is to make sure that the overall function is working, like the whole body is functioning. So when I think about competition in this form, it doesn't really make sense. Like if my heart is failing, like my liver is not going to be jumping for joy.
Hmm.
My brain is not going to be jumping for joy. I mean, there's just like that concept of competition doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. And I think humanity is supposed to be kind of like that too, where, you know, when one person succeeds, we all succeed, given all these other factors are in place, which is equality and everyone has access to whatever they need to advance. Um, so if I'm advancing but no one else is, I got to pay attention to that. Like, that's not going to be good for me in the long run. And I think we see a lot of that in the world. But when I start thinking about that, it helps me to center myself and go, wait a second, I'm not in competition with other people in the way that I was sort of raised to think that only one can be on top. And, you know, the truth is, we all know like that one who's on top doesn't stay there for very long, right? So
Right.
that fear, the fear of not making it there, and then the fear of staying there, like it's so, uh, such a, I feel like it's antithesis to like what we're really created for, which is to grow and advance all together.
Yeah, I hear you. That resonates with me, and I think about cooperation too. That's a concept or like a virtue even that I've been reflecting on recently, because cooperation means that everybody shows up and gives their best. And that means everybody wins. It's a win-win all around.
Yeah, like in our body, right? Like when all the organs are healthy and functioning as they are meant to, you know, and the body's incredible where it can make it, you know, like it can adjust for,
Yes.
you know, like moments where like something is having a hard time or you're sick, but that's not the way it's meant to be. Like we're all supposed to win together, so to speak.
Yes. I'm just curious, in your photography that the images you've captured, have you been able to see that oneness come through in the people you've met, the images you've captured? Like, have you, because you've traveled the world taking photos, I'm curious if the perception that it's all about one and being number one, if it sort of has dissipated when you've been around the world and witnessed uh, so many different kinds of people. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like as you're saying or asking me that question, I forgot that, or I didn't really notice that being number one is different than oneness, right? The
Mm,
same word, but the concept is very different. Like oneness has to do with this harmony and cooperation and unity, and it's not about stepping on top of one another or making sure one is below you, so to speak. Um, but yeah, I feel like a lot of the projects that I've been able to photograph, interestingly enough, a lot of them had to do with education.
hmm.
And what I loved about what I was photographing were situations where students were able to thrive. And you did see, I saw a lot of um, classroom experiences or interactions between students as well as the teachers and students where they were really helping each other. I think this concept of accompaniment was really strong. Also, encouragement, um, and ultimately the ultimate belief that every soul has the capacity and
Mm.
to learn and to grow and to thrive. And I feel like that is an element of oneness that I was able to witness firsthand, and then to take photographs of. You know, when I was in Liberia, there were a lot of young women that I was photographing that talked about what it was like surviving the civil wars. Now, by the time I reached them, they, you know, they were children when the wars were happening. And so by the time I reached them, they were, you know, young adults. And so they talked about what that was like to survive and how they really just had to have hope and needed support from others, and that there was no shame in that, you
Hmm.
know, when we're talking about shame. And I just thought that was so beautiful, um, to hear them understanding that, you know, what happened to them, they, you know, was what happened to them. And so what they need to get beyond that and to transform from that situation, they needed others to step in to support them. Now, they have to be the ones that are driving themselves, right? Like no one can do it for them. But I love that there was this recognition that no one does it alone. And that's something that
Mm.
I always try to tell anybody that's younger than me that always asks for advice. I'm like, you know, the first thing is no one does it alone. Even myself, when I'm trying to figure out how to do something, I'm so grateful when I have other professional photographers that are willing and generously helping me. And I remember one time recently, I was asking somebody, I was like, why are you helping me? You know? And they just said, hey, I didn't get here by myself. I had a lot of mentors. I had people that were very kind and thoughtful and, you know, really stepped in when I needed support. And I was like, thanks for reminding me because I already knew that. But we live in a world that always wants to keep playing that tune, which is not based in truth, which is, you know, the person who's successful like somehow makes it magically by themselves, that they are like these
Mm.
superheroes that just somehow shazam, that's it, right? It's like
Right.
no, no, that's not really true.
Right. Oh, that's so such wise insights. Yes. It's so hard for people to, I think, step away from those beliefs and those values that they've been raised with or that, that were instilled in them, especially if the value means that this is your way to survive. This if you do it this way, this is how you it's almost like survival versus thriving or versus true, I don't know, true like joy and happiness. Like it's I think for a lot of people it's survival mode in terms of that I got to make it to the top. I've got to be number 1. I've got to do whatever I need to do to get there. To me that's such a survival mode mentality,
Yeah,
which has its limits, no doubt. I mean, survival mode serves its purpose, uh,
yeah,
but it really is limiting, and I don't think the end result or the destination really offers truly what people want, which is yes, to be accomplished and to live their lives using their gifts, their talents, being acknowledged and appreciated for those talents, and also like doing it in a way that feels unfettered or that just feels kind of easy. Like the idea versus um getting to the top, number 1. That's a lot of work. That's like
oh
your sweatbands on, you gotta hustle, you gotta work, you gotta cut corners, you may not be honest, you may, and it's like, man, if we
yeah,
all could just step up to the same line, or even like I imagine like a circle, step up, but it's like a circular line, or an image of a circle you can see, you all step up, then we all, I don't know, we all can just, yeah, support each other, like you were saying, help each other move ahead and move forward. And to me, there's also something very powerful, and there is a certain kind of success in being a person that helps someone else move forward. Now, maybe that person doesn't get it, the same kind of acknowledgement that the person moving forward might get if they've advanced and they've achieved something. But just knowing for yourself, even if no one acknowledges it, yeah, I helped do that. Not from a place of ego, but
yeah,
just acknowledging I helped. That was something I could do and I did it and I did it well. I mean, I don't know. I think there's that to me that offers a lot of value. But again, I think there's this aspect of needing to be recognized, needing to be awarded, needing to be
hmm.
yeah, just seen and making sure everybody else sees you, like that 15 minutes of fame. I was talking to a friend about this when we were talking about cooperation. It's like 15 minutes of fame. When you actually have real cooperation where everybody gets to step up and be their best selves, use their gifts, use their talents, um, then there's no need for 15 minutes of fame. Everybody can always have their fame, so to speak. But it's
Right.
just we're not there yet in terms of seeing that as a real possibility and something that's really valuable.
Yeah, and you've worked on video productions. I mean, and there are some photo productions or photo shoots where it's like a crew, right?
Mhm.
And when you're able to do that, it's really powerful. And it allows you to focus on what you're supposed to do.
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
I always loved meeting artisans that were had spent many years refining their specialty, their craft. And you see the results of their time, like time put in into developing their craft. And there's something really beautiful about that. And yes, I
Mhm.
do. There's a part of me that loves diversity of and a wide range of capacities of whatever you're creating. And like the Renaissance artists that can do all kinds of stuff. They can sing and dance, but then they can also like act, and then they can also like paint, and so that's amazing. But I love it when people can focus. They give themselves, or they're given the opportunity to just focus and hone in on one thing and develop and refine, and take time to grow that craft. Um, I had an artist mentor who told me that she's of Japanese ancestry, and she said, Nancy, most Japanese artists are not masters until they're almost close to death,
Oh, wow.
you know. And I was like, what? And she just said, no, my point is that it takes time. And this is part of the commitment of your craft, is to put in that time. There's value and there's beauty. And I thought, wow, it was
Mhm.
really good to hear that. She said, for some reason we live in a society now that's like, the quicker the better. And
Mhm.
if you can do it right away and fast, and you get the shot, or you get the whatever the pottery piece that you're trying to do right away, that somehow you're a master. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's a mystery, right? Like sometimes you do create something without a whole lot of experience, and it's amazing, and it captures a lot of people's attention, and it does serve the purpose of connecting people. But like, it's a mystery. It's like we don't know why that happens sometimes. And then there are those folks that, like, I've had a lot of photo mentors who you probably don't know them because they're not really out there, but wow, they really like every day they like are taking photographs out there, and they are creating, and they are so talented, and they are highly skilled in their techniques, and they understand how the sun works, and
Mm.
how all their equipment is working. But it's just like constantly putting it in and putting in the years. So I think there's that balance. um I don't know, all of a sudden I felt like I went on a different route.
That's great. It's it's getting into the more granular area of the joy and the dedication and the sort of owning of our gifts and talents. Um, there's
Without shame, without apology,
That's right.
right? That's what's really tricky sometimes.
Oh, yes. Yes. Because it is so easy to look at the person next to you who maybe is doing something similar or maybe isn't, but they have some sort of accomplishments that you admire. And it's so easy to compare and to say,
Mm.
oh, they've got it going on. But we don't know, kind of to your point of this whole journey of mastery, we don't know if we don't know them personally. And even if we do, we may not know the intimate details of their journey, how they got to where they are in this moment when you happen to be looking over at them. And it's also a
And
matter of,
Tiffany,
yes,
sorry to interrupt, but like we also don't know what their assignment is, like what the universe wants them to do.
that's true. Exactly. Exactly. And right, if we are willing to hone in on our abilities, our gifts, mastering some aspect of our gifts into a talent that becomes a real craft, and we also at the same time are honing in on what it is we're meant to do. And maybe sometimes there's like multiple missions of what we're what we're supposed to be doing, but you pay attention to that calling, then you get to step up and you get to, you arise and you offer your gifts and you make a difference, you make a contribution. And I think that that's where the energy should really go, in my opinion, not to like looking left and right and seeing what everybody else is doing. Sure, we can be inspired by people. Absolutely. And we could admire in that same spirit of inspiration. But if all we're doing is looking left and right and comparing ourselves to others, that's just wasted energy. I've
Yeah.
learned um, the time we take to cultivate our own development is so valuable. It's invaluable. And like you said, there are many assignments and missions, and we've got to be present to them so that we can step into them, not miss them.
Right.
So it's really valuable, and I appreciate the focus you're offering on honing and development, and evolving our abilities and our skills.
And it's an experience that for me has been both with others and by myself.
Say more about
So
that.
the with others, having mentors or people who can show me something that I didn't really understand, or just to be encouraging, but then by myself, to acknowledge that only I can do really the internal work, like no one else can do that for me. Um, and
Mm,
so whatever it is anybody has lovingly offered to me or presented to me, only I can decide to take it in and then to process it somehow internally. So I think a lot of artists talking about how they have to go on retreats or take time to kind of zone out or to really carve out a space where we can sort of just think on our own. I
mm,
really find those times valuable, um, and almost invaluable. Like I just cannot not have those. Um, so I'm a Baha'i, and so one of the things that I love every year is during the Baha'i fast, which is a 19-day fast from sunrise to sunset. We abstain from food and drink. I always take time during those 19 days to pray and meditate and just let my heart and my mind just dream and really beckon to the universe what is my next assignment, artistically. And just, for me, it's not a separation, it's like for my life. So
mm,
I just love that carved out time where I can just really reflect and dream. And it's so much fun when I give myself
mm.
permission to just relax into it. Um, so yeah, I think it's one of those experiences where you are with others, but then you're by yourself. And since we're talking about the topic of shame and being unapologetic, I think that's a huge component to being able to experience some of these things or to do these things, because you have to just go and do it, you know? And at some point, you just don't explain to people why you're doing it because you don't need their permission. You just got to do it, right?
So true. Like I always say, I'm the one who answers for my life when it's over, no one else. And I don't mean that in a morbid way. I mean that like in a really kind of cool, joyful way. Like I get to answer for all the things I've done, and I want to be able to reflect at that point, whatever that experience is like at the end. I want to be able to reflect on. Sure, maybe I have to call myself account for the things I didn't do well, but I think it's an opportunity I'm hoping that will allow me to really look at all that I've accomplished and see it in a different like from a different perspective. It's so hard, like, because we're in the middle of our lives, and like you're saying, maybe something like a fast or a retreat that does give us the opportunity to step back, and it gives us the time and space to look more closely or look from a different vantage point. You really do have to intentionally make that time and space happen in whatever way, shape, or form that is. But I also think, oh, but at the end, whatever that's like, that'll be its own time and space of maybe really literally no time and space. But do you know what I mean? It'll be the opportunity to to reflect, and so I feel like, well, until I get to that place, which I hope is
Mm.
way down the road, because I have a lot that I want to accomplish here. I we'll see what the plan is, but that's my idea. You know, I do want to be more mindful about what I'm doing with my time, with my energy, with my gifts, and so I appreciate reflecting with you on that as well. It's quite a journey, and you really are. Yes, you accompany people, people accompany you, you support, but at the end of the day, you really are on your own.
Yeah.
It's a journey of one ultimately. As
Yeah,
like
you came into this world, you know, I mean, of course there are people there with you. Your mother was like
yes.
huge, right? But you are coming in by yourself and you leave by yourself. Oh, having said that though, I do think that I do want to acknowledge that, you know, we do have loved ones that are around us, you know, whether it be family, spouses, partners, children, grandchildren, whatever. And you know, we don't have to be mean or rude to them to carve out our own space. But I
Mm,
think being able to communicate what our needs are without shame is really important. Um, because, you know, ultimately it is about if we're healthy, then we can be healthy for them, you know?
yes. That's quite an idea. Yes. I hear that.
Yeah.
Oh, Nancy, that sounds good. I feel like we could have multiple conversations on this topic, looking at different aspects of purpose and calling and skill and de- just development in general. Yes, let's look at this idea of domestic violence or kind of violence in general. I know because of your work with a domestic violence organization, you've probably learned a lot about the experience people go through, men and women, and perpetrators and victims. And I'm just curious what you've witnessed or understood or observed, or just what you've gained in terms of understanding the experiences people have and how they move forward with
Mm,
without shame just completely devouring them.
mhm, mhm. I think one of the things that shame does to us in any sort of trauma is that it blocks us from healing, which
Hmm.
sounds so like, oh yeah, of course, right? But I was thinking about how some of the interviews that I've heard of men who have harmed a loved one, these happen to be men that had remorse and had desired um, to change and to whether it was to uh, reconcile with their partner or to just move on so that they could have a relationship in the future that would be healthier. The thing that I noticed about all of them was that they talked about how the shame, the weight of the shame of what they did was so heavy
Hmm.
that it really required people on the outside of themselves, like, you know, people around them, whether it be a friend or a family member or a mentor or a health practitioner, or an advocate, to really just not to listen and to not judge, to hold accountable, and that they hold themselves accountable, but to understand that um, they could change, like the belief
Hmm.
in them as a human being, that innately that they were good men. And I just thought that that was really powerful to hear that.
Hmm.
Um, you know, this is something that's really hard for society to deal with because it's just easier for us to just say good guys, bad guys you put in jail, good guys, you know, they're the ones that we celebrate, right? But what I love knowing is that in the domestic violence community, as well as just in social justice, in social service organizations, the conversation around these kinds of things, not just in domestic violence and not just intimate partner violence, but just violence in general, people are asking, well, how do people become violent? Like, when was it something that happened to them when they were younger? And I do believe that, I'm sure you've heard this before too, like hurt people,
Right.
right? And so what do people need to heal so that they don't further harm others or hurt others or themselves? And it takes a lot. I mean, it's very complex. It requires incredible patience and wisdom and insight and a lot of not shaming ourselves for not knowing how to do something so that we can do it better the next time. So I feel like collectively, not only individually, but collectively, we are learning how to do that. We're learning how to help each other to build those internal capacities to transform ourselves as well as the community. It takes a lot of time. And I think the other thing we all had to kind of remember was that, because I've heard people say this in conversations, is not going to go away in just one generation. We didn't get here. And we talked, I'm sure you've heard this too, like during this last year with anti-Black violence and anti-Black racism, as well as anti-Asian hatred. I mean, we didn't get here just overnight, right? Like, it's been generations upon generations upon generations that have really brought us where we are now. And so it'll take time for us to heal from that, to transform that, to really bring it to where we're supposed to be, which is what we talked about earlier, this equilibrium, this unity, this oneness that our hearts really yearn for. So yeah, so I think shame is just really, really heavy. And I appreciated those men speaking out publicly. And I think some of the interviews that I saw were actually with Oprah.
Oh.
But I also knew, I knew one person who actually was interviewed by her, which was part of the reason why I really paid attention. But even other gatherings where I've listened to men, been in spaces with men, where they really talked about what it was like to know that they harmed someone. Now, I personally, and this isn't about like any sort of confessions, but I know times when I've hurt somebody and wow, that's really painful, or you're like, I really hurt that person and I didn't intend it, or even if I did intend, I didn't intend it to be that harsh or whatever. So I think about how that weighs heavy on us and
Mm.
on me. And so I think what helps is having this element of detachment and trusting that the universe or God, who whatever you believe that's sort of like bigger than ourselves, has mercy and is
Mm.
watching over us and will help us. And then you just have to at some point just really, you've done your work and then you have to like let it go and move forward, you know? But,
Yes.
you know, the forgive and forget is a very interesting process.
Yes, absolutely. It is. And
And maybe you can never forget, right? But like to be able
mhm.
to move beyond it. I liken it to the experience of, how when you are really affected emotionally by an experience that either happened to yourself or to another, and then you just have to like cry it out. And
Right.
sometimes it takes forever. Sometimes
Mhm.
you'll like be at a movie and then like you'll see a scene that will trigger the memory of that thing and then you start crying. And then in the future you just don't cry. It's like
Mm.
I don't know how to explain that. But it's like
Mhm.
your system needs to like get it out.
Yes. Yes. I don't know all the psychology of it either, but there's something I believe about a traumatic experience, or even if it's not something you considered maybe as heavy as trauma, but it's an experience that made a deep impression on you, then the more you kind of there's a whole physiological, I think, process involved. So the more that you sort of physically release, then it starts to let go of the experience, lighten the experience. And again, I don't know all the science and biology of related to it, but yes, no, it is. It's a process for sure. And yeah, shame is so interesting because we, sure, I mean, there are crimes that are committed that are egregious. I mean, very egregious that I believe shame absolutely serves as a tool,
Yes.
not for someone to live in it forever,
Yes.
but to it's a tool to allow someone to understand there are things that we do in this society that are acceptable and there are things that we don't do. So now sure that's a whole other conversation about the criminal justice system and prison systems. I mean, yes, maybe those are not well, clearly they're not functioning in a way that really truly rehabilitates people. Not always, although I know of a number of prison programs that are doing some amazing things to truly rehabilitate people. But those programs are actually about the human spirit and people, inmates reflecting, getting educated about maybe an example would be men who are learning about patriarchy
Mm.
and they're learning that it's what it's about and why it's not valuable and why it hurts especially women and children in their lives and in their communities. So something of that nature is really more of a spiritual endeavor. It's educational and it's spiritual. But those are the only kinds of programs that I know of where people really who have committed some very egregious and some egregious crimes where there's any sort of transformation.
Yeah.
But in terms of shame as a tool, so I think it can be utilized as a tool, but in general, for something like you said, maybe some we've hurt someone, a friend or a loved one emotionally, or just maybe not been as thoughtful as we could have been, or whatever, not as inclusive, whatever it may be. I feel like shame, it's really not that helpful in those situations to move forward because shame really means often that we, oh my gosh, it can put you in a space where you think, oh my gosh, I'm the only person. I feel like I'm the only person who's ever done this, who's ever misstepped, who's ever been hurtful. And it's like, okay, no, that's not true. Not when it comes to kind of the day to day challenges of life. So that's where I feel like shame just gets in our way and holds us back
Mm.
because if we're just always living in shame, then we really don't, it's so hard to move forward. Again, for something that's like a serious, like a crime, sure, it can be a tool, but that's how I think about it. And it's I feel like it's just nice to, like you said, find a way to address something and then move forward. And know that
Right.
like nobody's perfect. And if we're holding ourselves accountable, that's what we can do for ourselves. We can't control other people, but we know if I mean, I always feel like when I hold myself accountable, uh, whether it's because I did something that wasn't that thoughtful or that kind, or I did something that maybe seemingly I think isn't kind, but actually it was more about justice in the moment. If as long as I like look at it, reflect on it, acknowledge it, I can move forward. But going through that process, that process is critical. Because if you're never checking in with yourself, woo wee, that's just like you're just stuffing it, all that stuff deep, deep, deep down, and then it never comes out. And that's when you're like living in shame all the time.
Right.
That's a burden, and I don't want it.
Yeah. No one wants that.
I don't think so. I think some people are too scared to really look at sometimes, especially if if there's a pattern, there's a behavior or behaviors that you've just been constantly operating within and you're just kind of keeping it all inside, then it can be scary, yeah, to look at it. But if you kind of checking in every day with yourself, whew, much easier process. The load is always lighter.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I want to just appreciate you just really affirming that yes, there are some things that if you've done harm, it is illegal. It's a crime, right?
Hmm.
And but when we talk about rehabilitation, we talk about transformative justice? How do we as a society move and heal and grow? Um, because as you know, and you've heard, with something like domestic violence, it's a cycle, right? Like
Hmm.
if you've experienced it within your own home, the likelihood of you doing that, also repeating it, is higher. Um,
Right.
Not definitive, like, you could be someone that's extra cautious and then ensuring that you get the help you need, not repeat. But, to create an environment where people feel loved and held accountable, like, I think that is an important aspect, like being told the truth. Like, you cannot do this anymore, right? What you're doing is not, it's illegal, or it's very, very hurtful, it's dangerous, you have to stop, you know. Um, but to be able to create a space, carve a space where it allows people the chance to really deal with that. I'm not sure. I don't really know that much about transformative justice in terms of like really contributing any sort of like um, talking points about it, but I myself am learning a lot about it, and trying to learn more. And it's a conversation that I think is very interesting to get involved with, because I think it is towards the path of healing and moving away from where it's only like a punitive system, you know?
Hmm.
Um, Something that I remember hearing at a training about fathers who have abused, how to work with fathers who have abused. And this practitioner said, it's really important to not only just provide skill training, like this is how you parent, but really to give the individual a chance to explore, what are they really thinking? Like, do they believe that children, for example, um, don't have rights, don't have a voice in a
Mm.
family system? And if they really don't believe that, then no matter what kind of parenting skills you train, the way that they parent will be impacted by their attitude and their philosophy. And I found that really, really sort of eye opening, And it's not just about showing someone how to fish, so to speak, but rather, exploring what's the value of fishing, and what's the value of approaching fishing in a certain way, and how does that impact the rest of the ecosystem if you fish this way at this time during this season, and what do you do with the fish? So I think having those kinds of conversations, it's just really just proof that humanity is really at a different place than, many generations ago, where we're maturing and advancing, and we can handle more of these kinds of conversations. A lot of it is because we need to,
Right.
but it's really a sign that we're evolving at such a level where we can handle more. And even though it feels like, oh my gosh, this just feels like a lot, but like even having this conversation about shame, like, this is a heavy topic.
Hmm.
Most people don't like talking about shame.
No, no, and that's why I wanted to give it
And
some
I agree with you.
give it some
Shame does
attention.
have, yeah, give it some attention, and to acknowledge that shame has a role, it has a purpose. It's like one of those emotions that we have, that it's like a catalyst for change, right?
Hmm.
Like how anger is a catalyst for change. Um, yeah.
Yes, Nancy. Oh, we could just chat all day. As always, I end every podcast conversation by asking my guest, I'll do that now, which television show, new or old, do you recommend and why?
I just finished watching The Baker and the Beauty, I think it is called.
Okay.
It's a series on Netflix, and it's somewhat kind of predictable. It's just fun. Um, I The thing that I love about it is I love the family. There's this Cuban family in there, and I love their relationships.
Hmm.
Like the different relation. like the different like members of the family. I love the way that they're connected and how they love each other and they fight, but they find a way to remember that they still really love each other and they're there for each other. It's just neat to see because it's just really, I don't know. I don't see it as much, and I like it.
Sounds good. I never heard of it. I mean, nowadays there's just so much content. I it is possible to never have heard of a show. I will check it out though. I like the idea of it. Is it like a dramedy
Yeah,
comedy? Okay. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really did enjoy our conversation, and I wish you continued success with your work in all its
thank you.
facets. And I'll chat with you another time.
Thanks, Tiffany.